Welcome to Unlocking Passion. Men Report. Let's begin with a new true story. Daniel Woomore believed he had found a cultured partner who valued him for who he was, rather than what he could provide. But on the morning of Nock's 36th birthday in August 2024, when he refused to buy a 2 million baht diamond necklace she had picked out at a Phuket luxury jeweler, she moved out of their shared villa within 3 hours. She took jewelry worth £80,000, electronics, his car keys, and his feeling that genuine affection existed anywhere in his new Thai life. The villa felt cavernous and wounded when Dan returned from the market that afternoon. Nock's clothes had vanished from the closets. Her toiletries had been cleared from the bathroom. The jewelry he had gifted her over 18 months, a collection he valued at around £80,000, was gone, along with his laptop, his camera equipment, and oddly the spare keys to his Toyota Fortuner, which sat locked in the driveway while the main keys were missing. On the dining table lay a handwritten note in English. "You never really loved me. You just wanted to control me with money. I deserve better than a stingy man who pretends to be generous. Do not try to contact me." Dan immediately tried to call her. The number was disconnected. He checked her social media and found he had been blocked on all platforms. He contacted mutual acquaintances and asked if anyone knew where Nock had gone. Most claimed ignorance, though one woman finally admitted that Nock had been planning this for weeks and already had a new sponsor lined up in Bangkok. But this story does not begin with a refused birthday gift and an emptied villa. It begins 20 months earlier in a Phuket rental office where a recently arrived British retiree met a woman who seemed like the answer to decades of loneliness, failing to realize that her cultured presentation was itself the first element of a carefully designed extraction strategy. Daniel Woomore arrived in Phuket, Thailand, at the age of 58 in late December, carrying 2 suitcases and about £420,000 in liquid assets he had accumulated through decades of hotel management work across Europe. His career had been respectable but exhausting, involving years of moving between Manchester, Barcelona, the Algarve, and finally back to Spain, where he had managed a boutique hotel in Marbella until he decided that 58 was old enough to stop working for others and start living for himself. Dan's personal life had been a series of relationships that faded rather than ending dramatically. Never married, no children. A few long-term partnerships that dissolved when career moves or simple incompatibility made continuing seem harder than separating. By his late 50s, Dan had accepted likely permanent solitude without any particular bitterness. He was simply a man better suited for professional hospitality than personal intimacy. The decision to relocate to Thailand was practical rather than romantic. Dan had visited Phuket twice on holiday and appreciated its combination of infrastructure, natural beauty, and affordability. He sold his apartment in Marbella for £95,000, added that to his accumulated savings, and decided to enter semi-retirement in Phuket, where he eventually might open a small guest house. Something manageable that would provide structure without the stress of large hotel operations. Dan's arrival in Phuket was methodical. He spent his first month in a serviced apartment near Patong Beach, orienting himself with the island's geography and the expat community. He joined several Facebook groups for British expats, attended a few meetups in pubs popular with English-speaking foreigners, and began researching long-term rentals. By January 2023, Dan was ready to find a real home. He contacted a rental agency in Rawai specializing in properties for long-term expat residents. The agency assigned him to view several options with a broker, and it was during this property tour that Dan met Nock. Nock appeared at the first property viewing as a friend of the rental broker, introduced as someone who could help with Thai language documents and local connections. She was attractive in an understated way, elegantly dressed in designer clothes that suggested wealth rather than tourism industry employment. Her English was excellent, her manner confident without being aggressive. "British?" Nock asked during the viewing. "I love British culture. So polite, so cultured, not like Americans who are always loud." Dan smiled at the flattery, explaining he was originally from Manchester but had spent most of his career in Spain in hotel management. Noak had apparently been briefed by the rental broker. "Very impressive career," she said. "You must be very organized and professional." They viewed 3 properties that afternoon. Noak offered opinions on each. "This one had bad water pressure. That one was too far from good restaurants. The third was overpriced for its condition." Her insights seemed genuinely helpful, rather than intrusive. When Dan selected a 2-bedroom villa in a quiet Rawai neighborhood for about £900 monthly, Noak offered to help him navigate the lease agreement and set up utilities. "Thai paperwork can be confusing for foreigners," she explained. "I'm happy to help as a courtesy. British people helped me when I studied in London, so I like to return the kindness." Over the following week, Noak was indeed helpful, translating contract terms, accompanying Dan to utility offices, and recommending reliable services for the internet and furniture rental. She declined payment for this help, insisting it was simply a neighborly welcome. But she accepted Dan's invitation to dinner at a beachfront restaurant as a thank you for her time. During dinner, Noak shared her background. She had studied fashion merchandising in London for 2 years, returned to Phuket, and owned a boutique selling designer clothes and accessories to wealthy tourists and expats. She had been briefly married to a Thai businessman in her 20s, but was now divorced and focused on her business and personal independence. "I'm not looking for a sponsor," Noak stated directly. "I see a lot of Thai women with foreign boyfriends always asking for money. That's not me. I have my own income, my own life. I just enjoy meeting interesting people from different cultures." This disclaimer was itself a strategic element. By explicitly stating she was not financially motivated, Noak positioned herself as different from the transactional relationships many expats experienced, making Dan feel that any connection they developed would be based on genuine compatibility rather than economic exchange. They began spending time together casually over the following weeks. Noak would invite Dan to beach clubs she frequented, to art gallery openings, to upscale restaurants popular with Phuket's wealthier residents. Dan noticed that Noak's lifestyle seemed expensive. She wore designer brands, drove a late-model BMW, and moved in circles that spent freely. But she always paid her own share during their outings, reinforcing her claim of financial independence. By February, 2 months after meeting, their relationship had evolved from friendship to romance. The transition was gradual and felt natural, with increasing physical affection, intimate conversations, and eventually nights spent together at Dan's villa. Noak would arrive with expensive wine and cook elaborate meals, demonstrating domestic skills alongside her sophistication. Dan felt incredibly lucky. After years of loneliness, he had found a partner who was attractive, educated, financially independent, and apparently genuinely interested in him rather than his resources. Noak made him feel valued, attractive, and relevant in ways he hadn't experienced in decades. In March, Noak suggested they should live together. "I spend most nights here anyway," she noted, "and my apartment lease is expiring. It makes sense to share expenses and actually build a life together instead of maintaining separate households." Dan agreed enthusiastically. Noak moved her belongings into the villa, bringing an impressive amount of designer clothing, shoes, handbags, and accessories that completely filled the closet of the second bedroom. Dan noticed that the quantity and quality of her possessions seemed excessive for the income of a small boutique owner, but he dismissed his concerns, assuming he perhaps didn't understand the profitability of Thai retail. Living together, Dan began to observe Noak's actual lifestyle more closely. She spent hours daily on her phone and laptop, supposedly managing her boutique, though she rarely went to the physical store. She received frequent deliveries of clothes, cosmetics, and accessories, which she claimed were business inventory, though they seemed to disappear into her personal wardrobe. She took extensive spa treatments, frequent salon appointments, and maintained beauty routines that seemed extraordinarily expensive. When Dan carefully asked about her business finances, Noak became defensive. "Why are you questioning me? Don't you trust me? I told you I am independent. I don't have to explain my money to you. Dan apologized for overstepping. He didn't want to be the controlling British boyfriend interrogating his partner about her finances. If Noak claimed she could afford her lifestyle through her boutique income, he should take that at face value. But gradually, Noak began introducing financial requests, always carefully phrased, always with apparent reluctance, always accompanied by an emotional justification that made refusal seem cruel or stingy. The first significant financial request came in April, 4 months into their relationship. Noak mentioned that her boutique needed renovation. The storefront was outdated, and wealthy tourists expected a more luxurious shopping environment. The renovation would cost about 150,000 baht, roughly 4,000 pounds, and while she had some savings, she was short about 50,000 baht. I hate to ask, Noak said, her discomfort seeming genuine. But I've already invested so much in this business. If I don't renovate, I'll lose customers to newer boutiques. Could you possibly lend me the shortfall? I will pay you back within 3 months from increased sales. Dan hesitated. 4,000 pounds was not insignificant, but it was manageable from his resources, and helping his partner's business seemed reasonable within a committed relationship. You don't have to pay me back, Dan said. Consider it an investment in our future together. Noak was overwhelmingly grateful, crying, thanking him repeatedly, promising that this generosity would not be forgotten. Dan felt proud to be able to help, to be the supportive partner enabling his girlfriend's entrepreneurial success. The boutique renovation supposedly took place over the next month, although Dan never visited the shop during this time. Noak claimed she was embarrassed to let him see it under construction. When the renovation was supposedly completed, Noak showed Dan photos of a beautifully remodeled space with modern fixtures and elegant displays. Dan felt satisfaction seeing his investment realized, but Noak's financial requests continued with increasing frequency and larger amounts. In May, she needed a new laptop for business management, about 900 pounds. In June, she had to buy inventory for the high season, 2,000 pounds. In July, her BMW required expensive repairs, costing 1,500 pounds. Each request was presented with apparent reluctance and always framed as temporary help that Noak would ideally handle herself. But circumstances had created cash flow problems. Dan provided the money each time, rationalizing it as normal support within a partnership where he had significantly more resources than she did. By August, 8 months into their relationship, Dan had provided about 12,000 pounds beyond normal household expenses. He began to feel uncomfortable about the pattern, but was unsure how to address it without appearing stingy or suspicious. Noak had meanwhile begun introducing new social expectations. She wanted to be seen at the right beach clubs, the right restaurants, the right social events. She would suggest venues where a dinner cost 75 pounds, where bottle service at beach clubs cost 200 pounds, where weekend trips to Bangkok or Koh Samui required 5-star hotel accommodations. This is how people in my social circle live, Noak would explain when Dan expressed concerns about spending. If we want to be respected, we have to maintain certain standards. You understand that from hotel management. Presentation is important. Dan found himself spending far more than his intended budget. He had planned to live comfortably but modestly in Thailand on about 3,000 pounds monthly. Instead, his expenses averaged 6,000 pounds monthly, double his budget, with the excess going entirely into maintaining Noak's lifestyle. In September, Noak raised a more substantial request. She wanted a new car, specifically a Mercedes-Benz C-Class, which would better reflect her business success and their relationship status. The vehicle cost 8 million baht, about 45,000 pounds. I'm not asking you to buy it outright, Noak clarified, but if you could put down a deposit of 600,000 baht, about 15,000 pounds, I can handle the financing for the rest from my boutique income. Dan refused for the first time. Noak, I can't provide 15,000 pounds for a car deposit. That's excessive. Your current BMW is perfectly fine. Noak's reaction was swift and emotional. She became cold and distant, spent days barely speaking to Dan, slept in the second bedroom, and made pointed comments about his age and lack of commitment. "I thought you cared about me," Noak said during an argument. "But you only care about your money. You want me to look cheap, to drive an old car, to be embarrassed in front of my friends. You don't respect me." The accusation of not respecting her was particularly cutting. Dan prided himself on being respectful, considerate, and supportive. Being accused of the opposite felt like a fundamental mischaracterization. He tried to explain his perspective, that £15,000 for a car was beyond reasonable, that he was already supporting her significantly, and that love shouldn't require constant financial proof. But Noak framed every refusal as an emotional rejection rather than financial prudence. "It's not about the money," she would insist. "It's about showing that you value me. Other men buy their girlfriends nice cars, but I have to beg and then get a no." Finally, worn down by the emotional manipulation and wanting to restore peace, Dan agreed to pay the deposit. The money was transferred, the Mercedes was purchased, and Noak was cheerful, affectionate, attentive, and grateful once again. Dan told himself this was a one-time major expense and that things would stabilize now. They did not stabilize. The Mercedes became a new benchmark for lifestyle expectations. If Dan was willing to contribute £15,000 for a car, he could certainly provide for other corresponding expenses. Noak began demanding jewelry. A Cartier bracelet for £850, diamond earrings for £1,700. She wanted weekend trips to luxury resorts costing £1,000 per weekend. She wanted designer handbags, Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Hermes, each costing between £1,000 and £2,000. Dan found himself in a pattern he couldn't escape. Refusing any request triggered emotional punishment, coldness, accusations, and threats to leave. Providing the money bought temporary peace and affection, but the next request would arrive within days or weeks, each larger and more expensive than the last. By December, a year into their relationship, Dan had spent about £80,000 beyond his intended budget. £68,000 directly on Noak's requests and expenses, plus £12,000 in elevated lifestyle costs to maintain the social presentation Noak demanded. His £420,000 nest egg had shrunk to about £320,000. At this rate, Dan calculated, he would deplete his resources within 3 years. The guesthouse dream became increasingly unrealistic. The capital required for that investment was being consumed by Noak's lifestyle maintenance. Through early 2024, Dan's financial situation continued to deteriorate while Noak's expectations escalated further. What had begun as occasional help had turned into complete financial dependence. Noak contributed nothing to household expenses, paid for none of her personal purchases, and expected Dan to fund her increasingly expensive lifestyle without question or complaint. Dan tried several times to establish boundaries. He suggested they needed to reduce expenses, that his resources weren't infinite, that perhaps Noak should contribute more from her supposedly successful boutique. Every attempt triggered severe emotional reactions. "You're trying to control me with money?" Noak would accuse. "You want me dependent and powerless. That's what all foreign men do. They pretend to be generous, but they really just want to own Thai women." The accusation of being like all foreign men was especially painful for Dan. He had always prided himself on treating partners as equals, avoiding the transactional relationships common among expats and local women. Being lumped into that category felt deeply unfair. Noak also began using social pressure more explicitly. She would invite other couples to dinner, expats with Thai partners, and make pointed comments about what the other women received from their boyfriends. Sarah's boyfriend bought her a beachfront condo in Kamala. Noak would casually mention, "She is so lucky to have a generous man who truly values her." Or, "Did you see Ploy's new Rolex? Her husband surprised her for no reason, simply because he loves her." The implications were clear. Dan was falling short in comparison to other expat men. His financial support was inadequate. His love was questionable because it wasn't sufficiently expensive. In March 2024, Noak introduced her most ambitious request yet. She wanted to relaunch her boutique with a major expansion, moving into a larger space, significantly increasing inventory, and hiring staff. The required capital was 2 million baht, about 48,000 pounds. "This is an investment in our future," Noak explained. "Once the business is successful, I'll have real income. I won't have to ask you for money anymore. This is the solution to all our financial tension." Dan was skeptical. He had never seen evidence that Noak's boutique actually generated significant revenue. He had never visited the store, never met employees, never seen financial statements. The entire business seemed increasingly fictitious, a justification for extracting money rather than an actual commercial operation. "I need to see your business finances," Dan said firmly. "If I'm investing 48,000 pounds, I need to see actual books, understand the business model, verify that the business exists and operates as described." Noak's reaction was explosive rage. "You think I'm lying? You think I'm scamming you? After everything we've shared, everything I've given you, you treat me like a criminal. I am done. I am leaving." She stormed out of the villa and didn't return for 3 days. Dan tried calling and messaging, receiving no response. On the third day, Noak returned but remained cold and angry. "I've been thinking," she said. "Maybe we aren't compatible. Maybe I need a man who trusts me, who respects me, who doesn't interrogate me like I'm on trial. Maybe I should move out and find someone who actually values me." Dan panicked. Despite the financial strain, despite his growing suspicions, he didn't want to lose Noak. She represented companionship, affection, a life that was less lonely than what he had known before. He apologized for his mistrust, promised that he trusted her, and agreed to provide the boutique expansion capital without financial documentation. The 2 million baht was transferred in April. Noak was cheerful and affectionate again, promising this investment would change everything, that within 6 months her business would be self-sustaining, and Dan would see a return on everything he had provided. Months later, by October, Dan had seen no evidence of business expansion, no returns, and no change in Noak's financial dependence. When he raised this concern, Noak explained that the expansion was slower than expected, that she was reinvesting all profits into growth, and that patience was required for business success. By this point, Dan had spent about 130,000 pounds on Noak beyond his normal living expenses. His remaining assets were about 270,000 pounds. He had gone from comfortable retirement to financial insecurity in less than 2 years. His daughters in England, 2 from a relationship in his 30s, had become worried when Dan mentioned his new relationship and his spending. They urged him to be careful, to protect his assets, to ensure he wasn't being exploited. Dan resisted their concerns, insisting they didn't understand his relationship or Thai culture. But privately, Dan began to recognize what he had refused to accept: that Noak was not a successful boutique owner who occasionally needed help, but rather someone whose entire lifestyle was funded by his resources and who had never financially contributed to their relationship. The final turning point came in August 2024, as Noak's 36th birthday approached. She showed Dan a diamond necklace at a Phuket luxury jeweler, an elaborate piece with multiple stones. The price tag was 2 million baht, about 48,000 pounds. "This is what I want for my birthday," Noak announced. "I deserve something beautiful after all the stress of running a business and supporting our relationship." Dan stared at the price tag, then at Noak, and felt something fundamental shift. For 2 years, he had been accommodating, generous, afraid of conflict, but this request, 48,000 pounds for a necklace, was so excessive, so disconnected from reasonable expectation, that it broke through his psychological barriers. "No," Dan said simply. "I am not buying you a 48,000-pound necklace." Noak's face transformed from hope to rage in seconds. "What?" I said. "No. That's absurd. I have spent over £130,000 on you in 2 years. I bought you a Mercedes, jewelry, clothes, trips, business capital. I am not buying you a necklace that costs as much as a car. You don't love me, Noak hissed. You never did. You're just a cheap man who pretends to be generous. I am done with you. She walked out of the jewelry store. Dan followed, trying to discuss it rationally, but Noak got into her Mercedes, the car Dan had primarily financed, and drove away without looking back. When Dan returned to the villa after running errands that afternoon, Noak was gone. The note on the dining table was brief and cruel. Her belongings were removed. The jewelry he had gifted, worth £80,000, was gone. His laptop, his camera equipment, and most significantly, the keys to his Toyota Fortuner had been taken. Dan tried to reach her by phone, but the number was disconnected. He checked social media and found himself blocked everywhere. He asked their mutual acquaintances where Noak had gone. Most claimed ignorance, but eventually, one woman admitted it. She's been seeing a German man in Bangkok for months. She has moved in with him now. She does this repeatedly, finds a generous foreign man, takes as much as possible, then moves to the next when the money stops flowing. Dan spent the first week after Noak's departure oscillating between relief and grief. Relief that the financial bleeding had stopped, that he was free from constant demands and emotional manipulation. Grief that 2 years of his life had been wasted on someone who only saw him as a funding source. That the companionship he cherished was entirely transactional. He immediately changed the locks of the villa. Even though Noak had taken her keys when she left, he reported his missing vehicle keys to Toyota and had the Fortuner rekeyed. He began the process of rebuilding his life without her, trying to understand how he had allowed himself to be so thoroughly exploited. But Noak was not done with Dan. 2 weeks after her departure, Dan began receiving messages from acquaintances mentioning they had seen concerning social media posts about him. When Dan checked platforms where Noak hadn't blocked him via mutual friends accounts, he discovered she had launched a comprehensive online campaign against him. On Facebook, Instagram, and Thai social platforms, Noak had posted lengthy accusations. She claimed Dan had been emotionally abusive throughout their relationship, that he controlled her through money, that he denied her basic needs while living luxuriously himself, and that he had isolated her from friends and family. I wasted 2 years with a man who claimed to love me but treated me like property, read one post. He made me feel worthless because I didn't have as much money as him. He used his financial power to control every aspect of my life. I finally escaped. But I want to warn other Thai women about Daniel Woomer from Manchester. He is not the nice British gentleman he pretends to be. The posts included photos of Dan, some that Noak had taken during their relationship, others that appeared to be screenshots from his own social media before she blocked him. She posted in expat groups, in Thai community groups, and in local Phuket forums. She encouraged her friends to share the posts widely. The impact was immediate and devastating. Dan began receiving hostile messages from strangers, calling him abusive, demanding he leave Thailand, threatening violence. His reputation in the expat community was destroyed. People who had been friendly now avoided him or aggressively confronted him about Noak's accusations. His landlord contacted him expressing concern about the trouble and hinting that Dan should perhaps consider alternative accommodation. The British expat groups he belonged to became hostile environments, where members accused him of being the stereotype of the abusive foreign man exploiting Thai women. Dan tried to defend himself publicly, posting his own version of events, that he had provided Noak with over £130,000, that she had contributed nothing financially, that her accusations of control and abuse were fabrications designed to punish him for refusing to continue funding her luxury lifestyle. But his defenses were met with skepticism and hostility. Of course he claims she used him, commenters wrote. That's what all abusive men say when Thai women escape their control. The narrative was established. Rich British man uses money to control poor Thai woman. She finally finds the courage to leave. He retaliates by claiming she was a gold digger. The situation escalated further when Noak filed a report with the Thai police, claiming Dan had abandoned her and left her destitute and homeless after making promises of financial support. The report was essentially a false statement, but created legal complications for Dan's visa renewal. His retirement visa extension, due for renewal in September, hit obstacles. Immigration officials questioned him about the police report, about his relationship with Noak, and about allegations of financial abandonment. Dan had to hire a lawyer to navigate the situation, spending an additional thousands of pounds to protect his visa status. The lawyer explained that Noak's strategy was sophisticated. She is creating legal and social pressure to force you to pay her off to make the problems go away. Many Thai women know that foreign men will pay substantial amounts to avoid visa issues, social humiliation, or legal complications. This is essentially extortion through reputation destruction. Dan refused to pay. Doing so would validate Noak's accusations and encourage her to repeat the pattern. But the refusal meant enduring months of social and legal harassment while his reputation lay in ruins and his visa status remained precarious. Through October and November 2024, Dan focused on legal defense and reputation management. His lawyer worked with the British Embassy to document the actual financial dynamics of the relationship. Dan provided bank statements showing transfers to Noak exceeding £130,000, evidence that he had paid all household expenses, and documentation of the car and jewelry purchases. The lawyer also discovered that Noak had a pattern of similar relationships. She had previously targeted a German man in 2021, a Swedish man in 2019, and an American man in 2017. Each relationship lasted 18 to 24 months. Each ended when the man refused further financial support. Each was followed by similar social media campaigns claiming abuse and abandonment. She is essentially a professional, the lawyer explained. She finds lonely expat men with resources, presents herself as cultured and independent to differentiate herself from obvious bar-girl relationships, extracts maximum money while maintaining the fiction of romance, and then moves to the next target when the current one stops paying. The social media attacks serve two purposes. They offer revenge against men who refuse to continue funding her, and they create a public record portraying her as a victim, which helps her attract the next target she wants to save from previous bad relationships. With the help of his lawyer and embassy support, the visa situation was resolved by December. Immigration officials reviewed the evidence and determined that Noak's claims were unfounded. The police report was marked as unsubstantiated. Dan's visa extension was approved, but his reputation remained damaged. Many in the expat community still believed Noak's version of events, or at least viewed Dan as someone who had exercised exceptionally poor judgment in choosing a partner. His social circle had shrunk to a small group of men who either knew Noak's history or had experienced similar exploitation themselves. By early 2025, Dan had relocated from Phuket to Khao Lak, a quieter coastal area 90 kilometers north. He wanted distance from the social environment where Noak's accusations still circulated, where he was still recognized and judged. Khao Lak offered anonymity and a simpler expat community, less focused on luxury lifestyles and social status. Dan rented a modest apartment for 18,000 baht monthly, about £450, and began rebuilding his financial and emotional stability. His remaining assets totaled roughly £250,000, enough to live comfortably if he maintained strict budgeting and avoided any romantic entanglements that could threaten his finances. The guesthouse dream was abandoned. Dan no longer had the capital required for that investment. And more significantly, he no longer had the energy or optimism to pursue it. Instead, he opened a small cafe in Khao Lak, a modest operation that required minimal investment, gave his days structure, and generated enough income to supplement his savings withdrawals. The cafe became his therapy and his purpose. He hired local staff, maintained reasonable prices, and built a reputation for good service and honest business practices. It wasn't the retirement he had imagined, but it was sustainable and meaningful in its own way. Dan joined an expat support group focusing on men who had experienced financial exploitation in relationships with Thai women. The group met monthly at a restaurant in Khao Lak, and Dan found grim comfort in the similarity of their stories. Successful Western men targeted by sophisticated women, spending enormous amounts in the belief they were building genuine partnerships, only to be discarded and often publicly destroyed when they stopped providing money. "The thing that bothers me the most," Dan told the group during one meeting, "is not the money. Yes, £130,000 is devastating. But what really hurts is that I truly cared about her. I wasn't trying to buy a girlfriend or control her. I wanted a partnership. I wanted companionship. I thought we had that." The realization that from her perspective it was entirely transactional, that I was never a partner but always just a resource to be extracted. That is what I can't get over. The group facilitator, a Canadian man who had lost similar amounts in a similar relationship, nodded. That is the real damage these women do. They don't just take your money. They make you doubt your ability to distinguish between genuine affection and a skillful performance. You lose faith in yourself, in relationships, in the possibility of authentic connection. The money can potentially be rebuilt. The psychological damage is permanent. Dan began warning newly arrived expats about sophisticated relationship scams. His message was specific. Beware of Thai women who present themselves as educated, independent, and financially stable, who explicitly claim they don't need your money, who have expensive lifestyles supposedly funded by their own businesses. These presentations are often more dangerous than obvious bar-girl relationships because they instill false confidence that the relationship is based on genuine compatibility rather than a financial transaction. Luxury was her language, and I never spoke it. Dan would tell men seeking his advice. She communicated love through expensive gifts, exclusive venues, designer brands. I thought I was being generous and supportive, but I was actually just funding her preferred lifestyle. And when I stopped, the relationship ended immediately because there was nothing else there. The love I thought we shared, it was just a transaction disguised as romance. By late 2025, Dan settled into his diminished but stable existence. His cafe operated successfully, providing about 25,000 baht in monthly profit, roughly £600. Combined with careful drawdown of his remaining savings, he could live comfortably enough if he avoided significant expenses. His relationship with his daughters improved slightly. They had been proven right in their warnings about Nook. And while there was some satisfaction in that validation, they were primarily relieved that their father had escaped without complete financial destruction. They visited Khao Lak once, spent a week helping Dan set up his new life, and left reassured that he was surviving, if not thriving. Dan learned through the Expat gossip network that Nook had indeed moved to Bangkok with a German man, a 63-year-old retiree with a substantial pension income. The pattern was repeating: expensive dates, luxury purchases, social media posts showcasing a glamorous lifestyle. Dan wondered how long it would take until the German man reached his limit and Nook moved on to her next target. Daniel Woomore is now 60 years old, living in Khao Lak and running a small cafe that provides modest income and daily purpose. The £420,000 he brought to Thailand after selling his Spanish apartment was reduced to about £225,000. £130,000 was lost to Nook's luxury lifestyle, £30,000 spent on legal fees and visa complications, and about £35,000 lost to elevated living costs during the Phuket period. He never recovered any money from Nook. The jewelry she took, worth roughly £80,000, was never returned. The Mercedes-Benz she drives was technically bought in her name with his money, giving him no legal claim. The boutique expansion capital of £48,000 vanished into accounts Dan could not trace. Dan has not attempted another romantic relationship. The betrayal destroyed his ability to trust romantic interest from Thai women specifically, and more broadly, his ability to believe in the possibility of genuine partnership at his age. He maintains friendly relationships with other expats and his cafe staff, but always with emotional distance, always with protective barriers that prevent vulnerability. His reputation in Phuket's expat community remains damaged. Nok's social media campaign, though eventually exposed as fabricated by those who investigated, still circulates in certain circles. Some people believe Dan truly was abusive, others believe he was exploited but exercised disastrously poor judgment. Few view him neutrally. But in Khao Lak, Dan has found a form of peace. He wakes up early, opens his cafe, serves customers, manages his small staff, and closes in the late afternoon. He walks on the beach in the evenings, reads extensively, and maintains regular video contact with his daughters. It is not the retirement full of adventure and romance he had envisioned, but it is sustainable and free from the emotional manipulation that characterized his Phuket years. His warning to other expats has been refined through repetition. The most dangerous scammers are the ones who don't look like scammers. Nok presented herself as educated, independent, financially stable. She claimed to have her own business and income. She explicitly stated she wasn't interested in financial support. Those presentations were themselves the scam. They made me believe the relationship was based on genuine compatibility. By the time I recognized the pattern, I had already invested over £130,000 in 2 years of my life. Dan estimates that his public warnings have reached thousands of expats and deterred at least a dozen men from entering similar relationships. Several contacted him after recognizing elements of Nok's pattern in women they were dating. The gradual escalation of financial requests, the emotional manipulation upon refusals, the lifestyle expectations presented as normal within Thai culture. One Australian man thanked Dan specifically. "I was 3 months into a relationship with a woman who seemed exactly like your description of Nok, independent, cultured, claimed to own a business. She had just started asking for money for her store renovation. Your story made me hire a private investigator. It turns out she owns no business. She lives entirely off foreign boyfriends and has been doing so for years. You saved me from losing everything." These prevented losses give Dan a sense that his disastrous experience was not completely wasted. If his humiliation and financial destruction can protect others, perhaps sharing the story has redemptive value, despite the accompanying shame. When asked if he regrets moving to Thailand, Dan's answer is measured. "I don't regret seeking companionship and a new life. Those are legitimate desires. I don't regret failing to realize that Nok's expensive lifestyle was incompatible with her claimed boutique owner income. I do regret not insisting on verifying that her business actually existed and generated revenue. I regret interpreting her explicit claims of financial independence as truth rather than the first element of the scam. Most of all, I regret not realizing that someone who communicates love exclusively through expensive gifts and luxury experiences doesn't truly understand love. They understand transaction." He continues to run his cafe, live his modest life, warn newcomers, and try to rebuild some financial security before old age makes working impossible. His savings of £225,000, if managed carefully, should last another 15 to 20 years combined with a cafe income. Not the comfortable retirement he planned, but sustainable survival. His daughters worry about his isolation and emotional withdrawal. During their visits, they encourage him to be open to companionship again, not to let one bad relationship close him off from human connection. Dan appreciates their concern but knows that his capacity for romantic trust has been too thoroughly destroyed to repair. "I am not lonely in the way I was before Nok," Dan explains to them. "I am content with solitude now. The loneliness that made me vulnerable to her exploitation has been replaced by a preference for independence. She cured me of loneliness by making me prefer to be alone." 3 years after Nok's departure, Dan sometimes still sees women who remind him of her. Cultured, well-dressed, confident Thai women in their 30s. He feels no attraction, only caution and a kind of sadness for whoever might be funding their lifestyle. He wonders if Nok is still circulating through foreign men. still presenting herself as the exception to transactional relationships while executing one of the most calculated financial extractions in the expat community. He learned through a mutual acquaintance that the German man in Bangkok lasted 14 months before cutting off Nok's funding. She immediately moved on to a Frenchman in Chiang Mai. The pattern continues and will likely continue until Nok ages out of attractiveness for her target demographic, or until she secures a man wealthy and naive enough to marry her and provide lifelong financial security. Dan's final message in his warnings to expats has become his signature conclusion. Luxury was her language, and I never spoke it. I thought expensive gifts and experiences were expressions of love, but they were actually her currency, the price of her presence, her affection, her companionship. When I stopped paying that price, she left immediately, because there was nothing else holding us together. Genuine love doesn't require luxury to prove itself. Genuine love exists in simple moments, shared values, genuine care. Everything else is just a transaction disguised as romance. Daniel Woomore survives in Khao Lek. A cautionary tale about the sophisticated exploitation that exists alongside the obvious scams targeting expats. His story is shared in support groups, in warning forums, in conversations among older expats who recognize the pattern and want to protect newcomers from similar destruction. He exists in the permanent aftermath, not completely broken, but permanently changed by the experience of believing he had found a genuine partnership, only to discover he had been funding a luxury lifestyle performance. The man who arrived in Phuket seeking a peaceful retirement and loving companionship is gone, replaced by someone more cautious, more isolated, and acutely aware that not all exploitation looks like a scam, and not all scammers look like criminals. His cafe continues to operate. His savings slowly dwindle. His daughters maintain dutiful contact, and Daniel Woomore lives with the knowledge that £130,000 bought him nothing but an expensive education on the cost of believing that sophistication means authenticity, that explicit claims of independence prove actual independence, and that luxury lifestyle compatibility can replace a genuine emotional connection. The price of affection, he learned too late, is sometimes everything you have. And the woman who seemed different from all the others was different only in the sophistication of her extraction strategy, not in her fundamental motivation. The end. If this investigation resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel for more documentary revelations about sophisticated relationship exploitation, the difference between obvious scams and calculated extraction, and the real tactics used to separate successful men from their retirement savings. Understanding these patterns could protect you or someone you care about from the devastating destruction that consumed Daniel Woomore's peaceful retirement dream.